And I think you will also value our next speaker definitely, who is about to appear here. Please welcome Salvador Ribas Mas, who's today joining us, who is the actually very interesting cross-cultural expert at Hofstede Insights. And he will tell you more about the impact of cultural differences into Scrum methodology. I'll tell you, Salvador, actually, your topic sounds really intriguing. So honestly, I would love to hear what have you prepared today. And I'm sure that our audience will be willing to have it will have a lot of questions to you. So, Salvador, the floor is yours. How are you today? First of all, I just need today, as I mentioned, today is the perfect day. Today is one of the most interesting days during the year. How are you feeling?
Very good. Very excited to be here and very grateful for you for this invitation to talk today.
Thank you. We are also very grateful to your work because we know that how you prepared and we actually also appreciate it. So, Salvador, the floor is yours. We are very happy when all of our speakers are happy, excited, and full of energy and ready to share this energy with the audience. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation to talk here today. It is a real pleasure for me to be here at this event at Giggles, and I feel honored to have so many people's attention. And without any further ado, I guess you have worked sometimes, or you're still working with the Scrum methodology, and that you are familiar with the Scrum values. And now I do have a question for you. Do you think these values are interpreted and perceived equally regardless of your nationality? Does an Indian product owner perceive, for instance, respect equally the same way as the US developer does? Or does a German Scrum Master interpret openness the same way a British developer does? So the answer is no way. No way, because similar people react differently before the same situation depending on their nationality. Therefore, similar developers react very different before the same working situation depending on their nationality. Therefore, if we have a nationally diverse team working in the same project using the same methodology, then we will have some cultural friction, for sure. I mean, culture has an impact on teamwork. And not because I say so. Just look at these statistics here. Like PricewaterhouseCoopers said that 65% of the US and European executives say that managing across cultures, it's a real challenge. And I'll come back to this later on. But before we dig into the impact of culture on teamwork and the Scrum teamwork, what are we talking about here? What is culture? Let me define it very briefly before we move on. And to do so, I'm going to show you this image. So in here, please write down in the chat, what do you see here in this image? Please write down what you see here in this image. Well, most of you see a frog. Now, please tilt your head towards your right hand. What do you see now? Haha, now most of the people see a horse. Now, this game, it's very useful for me because it helps me to show graphically that reality is one. But the way we have to perceive one reality changes from one to the another one, from one country to the next. Now, we can use an analogy and say that a person from a different country is someone with the head tilted towards the right or towards the left more than us, right? So the reality is the same for everybody, but the way we perceive this same reality changes from one country to the next. It is exactly what you see in your screen now. And you might say, okay, we got it. We don't need a cross-cultural expert to get that. And well, sometimes it gets trickier. Sometimes it's more difficult and it's not that obvious. And at the end of this talk today, I'm going to give you a tool and I will share it with you that will make your life much more easier. Now, the key to understand the impact of culture on business and teamwork is that similar people react differently before the same stimulus depending on their nationality. So again, similar developers react differently before the same situation. So it's not good enough to copy paste the techniques and the approach to teamwork that works in a certain country and replicate it over and over again with everybody, regardless of the country you are in or regardless of the nationalities you're dealing with. It's not good enough. You need to translate this approach to work and this approach to teamwork before you can implement it cross borders. Now, to keep on defining culture and to keep on going further into this definition and to this understanding, I'll tell you that culture has several layers. Now, in the outer layer, you will find practices. It means like our language, our rituals, our celebrations, the way we greet, the way we dress, the way we eat, etc. And it is and from this superficial layer, it's the etiquette and protocol science who deal with it. Right? I didn't come here to tell you to explain you, to talk about etiquette and protocol. I came here to give you something much more valuable than this. I came here to talk about the values, cultural values, which are deep inside the culture. So etiquette, just to be very clear what we're talking here, if you check the etiquette and protocol lists that you can find in internet, you will learn that in Japan you must take the business cards or visit cards with the two hands, and you can't read anything, you can't write anything on them. You must read them carefully, you must put them aside in your table carefully, and so on. You will also learn that in China, you need to leave 1 or 2 bites of food inside your plate just to show to your host that you're satisfied and that your host can be happy. And if the etiquette and protocol will tell you that in India, you greet with a namaste, right? And it is important to be familiarized with the etiquette and protocol of the countries you're dealing with, but it's not enough. You also need to master the cultural values, which is the invisible part of the culture. Because the values is what will make us take one or another decisions. The invisible part of the culture is what will determine that our teams works smoothly or our team works with friction. And what are values? So, in short, values are it's a broad preferences for one state of affairs over others, to which strong emotions are attached. So, what is good here in my country, it can be bad in your country. What it is moral in this country can be moral in the neighboring country. What it is rational in France can be irrational in Germany. So, in these general preferences, it's what we will make us make one or another decision. So, again, and just to wrap up this concept, it's important to know the etiquette and protocol of the countries you're dealing with. But what it will give us the competitive advantage is the mastering of the cultural values. So, clear with that. Now, before we move on, I'm gonna knock down a myth, because I've heard many times something like, "Oh, this cross-cultural science is nice to have, but it doesn't affect me because I just work in the Western hemisphere, or I just work in Europe, so I don't need my field of working is only Europe, so I don't need this intercultural talk." So, but I can't disagree more, because they think that in the world there is only two ways of working, which is the Western way and the Eastern way, ours and theirs. But this simplification will harm your results, because the East is very diverse, and also the West is very diverse. So some other people, they go beyond this idea and they say, okay, there's some kind of diversity in Europe, but there is three Europes, which is Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and Southern Europe, and that's it. And it might be true that there's some similarities in these three categorizations, and they have common traits, but there is also many differences when it comes to teamwork on a Scrum methodology, and I'm gonna prove it to you. So now, at this point, we know that culture has their impact on the Scrum teamwork, and we know what we talk about when we talk about culture. Now, the next question is, can we control the impact of culture in teamwork? Can we make tangible something apparently intangible, such as culture? Can we measure culture in figures? So the question is, yes, we can. And we can thanks to this gentleman. Let me introduce you Professor Gert Hofstede. According to The Economist, the man who put culture on the map. He is one of the most influential business thinkers worldwide, according to the Wall Street Journal. Just scan through this list quickly and you will see Bill Gates. You will find Stephen Covey. You will find Richard Branson. You will find Michael Dell. You will find Jack Welch. They are the best in the world. And Professor Gert Hofstede is within them. So I've been lucky enough to have been trained by him, because Professor Hofstede told me how to translate his scientific research into applicable business solutions. He taught me how to use his model to knock down cultural barriers. So he taught me how to use his academical research to make tech teams more productive and make their companies more competitive. Because, my dear friend, if you are capable to master the cultural nuances of the members of your team, you will get better results. But how come? How come Professor Hofstede is that prestigious? So, because he decoded culture. He decoded culture. And how does it work? The model he used to achieve this goal. I'm gonna briefly explain it to you. It's quite easy, because you might be familiar with the RGB system, the primary colors. So any color on the screen of your computer contains a certain amount of red, a certain amount of green, and a certain amount of blue. So with this system, we can define any color with three figures, which corresponds to the amount of each of their colors. So for instance, you can define these colors with these figures, or you can define this color with these three figures. We can think of each primary color as a dimension from a scale to 0 to 255. So, using the same analogy, the Professor Hofstede broke down national culture of every country, not in 3 dimensions, but in 6 different dimensions. So, and as in the same way that we can define any color in 3 figures, we can define any culture worldwide with 6 different figures. And these figures, and anything that can be measured by figures, you can compare, you can manage, you can anticipate. I mean, we can control cultural differences. And who on earth doesn't want to control something that it is impacting the performance of your team? Who on earth doesn't want to control this? So up to this point, we've defined 111 different countries, and we busy defining the rest. And we didn't make these figures up, and we didn't invent them, or these figures aren't out of the blue. These figures are the result of a very accurate and rigorous scientific research. So, and I could talk for hours and hours about the details of this research, but I prefer to use these 20 minutes left to give you clues and give you tools to how you can improve the efficiency of your teamwork and your team. So at this point, you might be asking, but okay, we have 6 figures per country, but what are they about, and what are they correspond to? So each of those 3 figures correspond to a basic dilemma that any culture is facing. So the six different questions that any culture worldwide is facing every single day. Any culture facing the same questions. Now, the answer to these questions is different in every society. And through with the model, what we do is we measured every response to every question for every country. And these are the six dimension or six country or six dilemmas any society is facing on daily basis. So, of course, I do not have time enough to go through all of them, but I will explain one or maybe two of them very, very briefly. And to do so, I'm going to use a personal history. I am the white guy here at your right hand side, and this is me in Kenya, because when I was even younger, I got an assignment, and I got an assignment to design and build up a hospital in Kenya. That was my second job abroad. And those two guys in my next to me, they were my team members. One of the first things that took my attention was that they called me chief all the time. Yes, chief, will do, chief, no problem, chief. Will do so, chief, all the time. And I felt like overwhelmed for this deference. And I immediately asked them to call me by my name. Hey, just stop calling me chief, just call me Salvador, like everyone else is doing. And of course they did, but I felt they didn't feel very comfortable doing so. And a few days later, I shared this anecdote with a friend of mine, also a Spanish friend of mine, and he told me that I should have never done this because that was a mistake. Because there was nothing wrong with me with them calling me chief of the time, because this was exactly who I was for them. Now, asking them not to call me chief, it was like I was telling them I'm not your supervisor. By telling them not to call me chief, it was like undermining my authority. By asking them not to call me chief, it was like telling them it's okay if you do not comply with what I ask you to do. So the formality chief and the authority itself, they were so tied together that if the first one was missing, then the second one was very weak. So the more formality chief was there, the more respect for the authority and the more functional the team worked, and the more we performed. So at the end of the day, I let them call me chief just because the sake of the company. So we call this first dimension power distance, and it is the extent to which the less powerful members of a society accept that power is distributed unequally. So in very hierarchical societies, an effective leader must take decisions, give instructions, even orders, and check they comply with them. And you keep a very real distance with formalities like chief. Now, whereas in a in an egalitarian society, an effective leader must coordinate persons, guide persons, facilitate, coach, train. And this kind of formalities like chief, they do not work. So here in the screen, I've picked two countries, Germany and France, which are neighbors, but and one might think they have a similar culture, but no at all. They have a very different, in terms of this first dimension, the power distance, they very different. So in Germany is very egalitarian, whereas in France is very hierarchical. So I just explained about the manager's role. In Germany, it's to support their team, whereas in France, the role of a manager is to lead and direct. For instance, the decision making in Germany is decentralized, and decisions are made by the group. Whereas in France, the decision making is centralized on the decision maker. Now, let's coming back to the Scrum values. Do you think after this small talk and after explaining about culture, the different cultures, the different dimensions, and these specific dimension, do you think these values, these Scrum values, are interpreted and perceived equally regardless of the culture? For instance, let's take respect. Is respect perceived and interpreted the same way in Germany or in France? The answer is no, because in France, respect means that you keep a distance between the product owner and the Scrum Master, and between the Scrum Master and the developers. And also, respect in France, respect means that developers will not speak up freely to contradict the product owner and the Scrum Master. They might do it, but in petit comité. So you can imagine that despite the fact that we are working with the same system and the same values, if we have a diverse team, we have a similar people, similar developers from different nationalities, they will behave differently. And they will find the behavior of their colleagues very weird. And therefore, some friction will happen. I mean, the project will still go on. I mean, there will be success, things will happen, but you are not reaching your full potential. Not at all. So I still have 10 more minutes, and I will explain you the second dimension very quickly. And I'll come. Look, this is how power distance, this first dimension, is spread all over the world. Look at Europe, what I told you before, how diverse it is. So it's not like West and East, but it's more complex than this. So dimension number 2, or primary color green, and coming back to my experience in Kenya, I used to pay the salary to my employees every Friday evening. So in one occasion, right next morning, I was heading to the market when I met Peter, which was the engineer of my team. It's the guy at the center of this image. And I said, "Hey, good morning, Peter." He said, "Good morning, Chief." And I said, hey, shall we have lunch together? And he said, of course, chief, but you have to invite. I've got out of money today. And I said, of course, man, no problem. This is on me. But then I noticed something weird was going on. And I said, look, Peter, you mean you doesn't have any cash in your pocket right now, but you still have most of your salary at home, right? And he said, no, I spend it all. And I said, really? Come on, but this is, I mean, the entire salary, you spend it in few hours. And he said, of course. And I said, but I just paid you yesterday. And he said, but that was yesterday, chief. It's all gone today. What did you expect? And I said, oh man, but I'll try to make my salary last till my next salary day. And he looked at me and he said, oh, you don't understand, chief. This town is very small. Here, everybody knows each other. And everybody knows that I'm working for the white guy. And everybody in town knows that I get my salary on a Friday afternoon. Therefore, everybody in town knows that I had the fresh cash in my pocket yesterday. And first, my mom came and asked me a share of this money to buy a new pair of shoes for my 4 little brothers. And then my aunt came at home and told me that the uncle is at the hospital and he needs to pay the treatment. And eventually the neighbor came and complaining because of the leaking of his roof and asked me for some help to repair the roof. And today, chief, I do not have 1 penny to buy a plate of rice. And I look at him and I said, wow, Peter, but this is lots of people to support you and understand you happy to help your parents and your family, but do you need to support your neighbors? And he said, you don't understand, chief. And this town is very small, and I do have a responsibility towards my community. My community helped me many times. And if one of us has a problem, it is a community's problem. If one of us succeeds, it is the community's success. So thanks to the community that collectively paid each and every tax of my university, I am an engineer today. And today, it's my turn to pay back to my community, contributing with my engineer's salary. And the day that I'll be too old to work, then the community will work for me. So we call this dimension individualism. So in individualistic societies, like as the US, for instance, or the UK, everybody is taking care of themselves and their immediate family. And immediate family means partner and young kids, period. Whereas in collectivistic societies, like for instance in Kenya, everybody is integrated into an extended family. An extended family includes friends, cousins, and neighbors, the entire neighborhood, my friend. So in these communities, they protect all their members, not only during childhood, but during the entire life, but in exchange of unconditional loyalty. And unconditional loyalty means that resources are shared. So you go to work all day long, and at the end of the month, you share your salary with your neighbors. So how does it feel? How does it feel? So in just like any color is composed of a certain amount of green, every culture is composed of a certain amount of individualism, either low or high, but you can't escape this question. So here I took two countries as an example, and they are Ukraine and the US, and I gave few characteristics, right? For instance, one of the most one of the characteristics of this dimension is the communication, either implicit or explicit. So just to explain you and how important is this, I will tell you that in the US, for instance, they use an explicit communication, which is the figure you have at your left hand side. So you say what you mean and you mean what you say, period. Whereas in Ukraine, for instance, you also use your body language. You also use the context. You also, what you don't say also matters. You also give clues, but also the common history and the posture and the social status and the time, all this combined is also a message. But depending on your culture, not everyone is getting the same kind of information. For instance, the Japanese, they very good at implicit communication, and they call it reading the air, reading the air, right? But not in everywhere, not everywhere, people is able to read the air. So now coming back to the Scrum values and more specifically openness, do you think openness is perceived and interpreted the same way in Ukraine and the States? So the answer is no way, because remember the previous slide. In the Ukraine, people will be open towards the team, but this does not mean that they will explicitly talk about everything. Because if it is a bit difficult conversation, they will let you know, but they will not express it in words. I mean, they will give you clues with the body, with the eyes contact, with the face expression, with the body language. They have many resources out there to communicate the difficult conversations. But for instance, the Americans, they will only get it if you explicitly say what you think and what you feel. So, in the other way around, if somebody is too explicit with difficult conversation, the Ukrainians might think this is unrespectful. And now, just to wrap up this talk, I will. This is the map of individualism. You see Europe again, very diverse. And now, just to put it in perspective, what I just said, I mean, I have briefly talked about the impact of two of these dimensions into two of these five values. So, but there is times 5 possible combination in total. 30 combinations in total. I just briefly described two. So, but there is much more that we can provide, and we can help Scrum teams to perform better if they work cross border, right? So I'm going to ask you that next time you're going to interact with a person from a different country, I encourage you to check these figures and compare the scores with your the scores of your country with the scores of the country of the person you are dealing with, and behave consequently, because the efficiency of your teams will improve dramatically. Now, thanks for watching. It was a real pleasure talking here, and let's keep in touch.
Definitely, Salvador. Thank you so much. To be honest, I really enjoyed your presentation. And until you, like, it seems like now the cutting edge technologies, they're transforming the way we're actually communicating with people from all around the world. But still, sometimes we don't get it, that still the technologies, they kind of, they break out the borders, but still they don't make, still there is a difference in terms of cultural differences between and sometimes maybe discrepancies between the different nations. So honestly, a lot of things, a lot of insights which you said, honestly for me were actually pretty exciting to listen to. And honestly, I would love to moreover like to listen more, because again, I would even like to suggest moreover for the future the topic between like kind of how the technology and culture they coincide in different countries, etc. This is really interesting for me. And for example, how probably on cultural based on the culture, which technology and which nation are using the most. This is also might be useful to talk about. I just want to also very quickly to ask you, because we are running out of time. Have you been mentioning Geert Hofstadter, the Dutch psychologist? When
Yes.
you, uh-huh.
Sorry, Eva, what was the question exactly?
If I'm not mistaken, is his name is Geert Hofstadter, Dutch psychologist. I've heard about him, so I was
Yes.
wondering the name you used, you actually mentioned, is it him?
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's him. It's him.
definitely, Salvador, we are waiting for you in 40 minutes for our Q&A session. I hope that our audience is really excited, was really excited as well as I am, and they will be willing as well to proceed asking you questions during our Q&A session. But we really need to like let you go for a while, and we'll be back as I mentioned.